Hello, and welcome to All the Grief, a regular podcast for all those who have been touched by grief. We are your hosts. I am Rebecca Luttrell.
And I'm Andrea Hiron-Mathern.
We are two friends, a therapist and a social scientist, both highly sensitive fellow grievers, here to share our hearts as we talk about all the grief.
Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning, Andrea.
It's so good to see your face.
It's been a bit.
It has been a bit.
How are you this morning?
I'm doing well. I'm sort of gearing up for a trip to go see my friends in Austin, and I have a lot of feelings. I'll be away from my boys, all three of them. I'll be away from my dog, and that's a lot for me. I haven't been away from the boys in a very long time, and so I'm adjusting to that and also really excited. It's the first time all of our group is going to be together, that we've all been in the same place for over 12 years. And my heart is like bursting with anticipation. I'm like welling up. I'm so excited to see them. So
who is the group? I don't remember if you mentioned it. Yeah.
Sure. So I lived in Austin for about 4 years. And in that brief time, in the spans of my life, I found my people with whom I share so many amazing memories and so much growth. And they're just my people that I can turn to all the time. And I have never found a friend group like them before, where we're all friends and our partners fit into the group really beautifully. And I can't wait to be with them. And I also know every time I'm with them, I wish I was with them all the time. And so I'm already like anticipating the grief of like leaving them and coming back to a life where I don't have that community, a drive away.
Yeah.
I have a lot, but I'm excited.
Yeah.
How's your heart? You're having
a weird week. It's a really weird week. I am coming to you from a hotel.
Right.
Where are we? Almost 4 years out from COVID lockdown, but COVID is always still, let's try not to get everyone sick. So my daughter was exposed very minimally, but I sort of scooped her up before she was with the person for too long. And then I'm in a blended family, so we want to keep her stepsister safe. And so the best we could do, I sort of been scrambling around and living a very nomadic life. So it's like that. But there's this, because I can get really complainy and miserable about having to not be at home. I love my grounding things, and this is a very ungrounded experience. But for her, I was like, all right, you got to get it together and you got to figure out like what's our narrative and how are we, navigating this. And so it's been really sweet to just look at it like we're on this adventure and part of it sucks. So we get to complain about what sucks and be sad about what we miss. And what can we do that makes this just something that is special, but that we're getting time to bond, that we're getting time to hang out. And I mean, that's sort of here in the present. And I know that those things are the things that start to build internal resilience, so that over the years, when she's in a hard situation, she'll be like, okay, I get to be mad about everything that sucks about this. And also, where do I have some things that are unexpectedly pleasant, or know that I'll get through this? And even she goes to a homeschool support program on Wednesdays, and I dropped her off and she's like, this is weird. We are staying in a hotel. It feels like we're on vacation. And now I have to go do this normal thing, like go to school. I just looked at her and said, it's weird. You're right. It's just weird.
Yeah.
So I wasn't trying to make it better. It's just, it's that. So I feel like there's kind of lessons and layers that are happening within it.
Yeah.
For me too, to just be like, all right, this is the ride you're on. And
that's a lot. So thank you for still being able to hop on and do these recordings. And I feel like those lessons that you talked about actually are so fitting for what we're going to talk about today. So we are talking to a friend of mine. Her name is Maggie Miller, and we have been friends for over a decade. We came together professionally in our lives as evaluators, specifically in museums. And we worked together on a variety of projects that were so fun and interesting. And then we just kind of came together also personally, just became friends and have a lot of sort of out of work things in common and just kind of one of those people that you can just like love to sit up on her roof balcony and sit and talk with. She still does program evaluation for nonprofits, but has been spending more and more time with her coaching clients. So she was an executive coach along with her program evaluation. And then COVID times, as well as her personal experiences, had led her to focus on coaching adult children of older parents. And she discovered in her own life that having an older parent can feel like having a new job. And someone who has come to her as a friend, but also as a client, I can attest to that. And it's one that we did not. She says that like we don't remember applying for, but I know for a fact I never actually did at all apply for that job. It's not like I did it accidentally in my sleep. I did not apply for this job, but I have the job. I have been given this job. And so this idea of executive coaching is a good fit for folks who are finding ourselves in this experience. And so Maggie really supports her clients in helping us to sort through these jumbled ideas, to figure out how to take action, how to see the experience that we're in and looking through it. And there are some really shitty parts of it. And there are ways to move forward through it, helping us to grow our skills and also tap into our own inner wisdom. She also has tons of resources and ideas, and she's a certified senior advisor. So I really can attest to the fact that Maggie really does coach with her heart, and that through this work, naturally grief comes up. So we're going to spend some time together exploring that, but I want to officially welcome Maggie Miller to the podcast. So hi, Maggie.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to be with the two of you.
Maggie, we're so excited to have you and to kick off. But just like how we usually kick off, we want to check in. How is your heart today?
My heart is actually really full because I get to talk to the two of you about something that's really meaningful. So that's what I come to with it. And also I was just before this, I'm in Al-Anon, which is for friends and relatives of alcoholics. And I was just in a meeting, and the sharing was just so completely profound that I'm still soaking in all that good stuff.
Oh, beautiful. What a great way to enter into this space. Well, we're so glad to have you. So we just wanted to start off by asking you, I know I read your bio, but would love to hear from you about your work and how you came into it.
Well, let's see. So I've been doing a lot of executive coaching over the years, but just a little at a time. And one day I had a really awesome session with a client, and he worked at a university, and the session was about culture change in his department and managing up the organization and also managing and leading his staff through this change. And the beauty of coaching is we all have so many answers inside of ourselves, and I'll call him Carl. Carl was no exception. He came up with some really fabulous ideas, and he was so energized by them. And so by the time the session wrapped up, he was raring to go, and he had all this clarity and all this motivation, and he had his to-do list. And around the time, I don't remember exactly where I was in my father's last few years of life. But I think at that point, I was wishing my dad would move from Clear Lake, California to Denver and get on this waiting list for Kavod housing, which is affordable senior housing in Denver. And he was less interested in that, or even in the idea at all about moving from his single wide trailer into any place that might be more sustainable over several years. And I hung up the phone with Carl, and I thought, I need a coach.
Oh.
That's when I started thinking, oh, well, I do coaching. I can coach people in my position. So that's really what got me into it.
Wow. Did you coach yourself, or did you find someone to support you, from that moment through the final years of his life?
I did coach myself.
Beautiful.
Which is never quite the same.
Sure.
But I did. And also I reached out to somebody who works with elders, and she turned me on to a friend of hers, and I'll just say her name because this woman's amazing. Her name is Jill Ielkema, and her business is Western Care Partners. She's really focusing on care consultation, and we can talk later about,
Yeah.
But at the time, she was spending a lot of time being a geriatric care manager. Now they're called aging life care professionals. What she did for me is we would meet and she would download just a ton of information that was helpful to me, but also just knowing that I could call her if and when there was going to be a crisis, and also her normalizing the experience for me that I was having, and also like having just really sort of practical, like, well, it's okay if XYZ happens because then we could do ABC. Whew, it gave me that sense of relief. So it wasn't technically coaching, which is a very specific process where you've been through it, Andrea, where basically the coach asks a lot of questions of the client and the client is the one to come up with answers. It wasn't technically that, but it was still very helpful.
So obviously, I talked about this in the beginning and you referenced it just a little bit, but I came to you, Maggie. And so just a heads up, Mom, if you're listening, which I don't think she does, which is totally okay. You are my aging parent, Mom. And but when I actually found out that you were starting to move into this realm, Maggie, I didn't actually know it was in response to your own aging parent. You were coaching a mutual friend of ours, and I had a good friend whose dad is older, and she was just, again, he's in California, she's in Colorado, and trying to sort of navigate this complexity of parents aging, being far away for her. And I remember saying, like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. We're all going to come into this space. And I can imagine a day when I'm going to need that. I didn't imagine it happening as quickly as it did happen, but I can imagine it. And so I want to talk just a little bit about how grief comes up in your work for your clients.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this past few days, and there's so many different kinds of grief that clients can experience. So one that comes to mind is the anticipatory grief of knowing that the parent is going to die. Right? Another is the grief in the moment of seeing a change. I mean, it's really like that Beatles song, I'm looking through you, where did you go? I mean, this happens with all of us when anybody in our circle changes. It's like, wait, we have the illusion that things are permanent. What's going on here?
Yeah.
So the grief of that change. Sometimes it is the grief on behalf of the parent, either current, like, I'm so sad that she can no longer do things that she loved. And the interesting thing about that kind of grief is that it's not always clear that the parent themselves is sad about it. So it's taking on a grief on behalf of another person, but possibly not even something the other person's experiencing. Another kind of grief is the grief for what I never had. And so as the parent becomes less and less able to give something that they were actually never able to give the client, it's sort of this sense of, I am never going to get this. I am never going to get her approval. I'm never going to get equal amount of attention to me as she is to my brother. That kind of thing. So that's, as I think about it, it's a lot of different kinds of grief, and more may come up as I think about it in our conversation.
Sure.
So you kind of embarked on this with your own journey with your dad and were self-coaching. And I'm curious what you learned in the process that informed the way that you work with people now.
That's such a good question. I'm sort of thinking back to that time, and I already knew some lessons pretty well. So perhaps my self-coaching was sort of a reminder of those things. That's when I started going back to Al-Anon meetings. I had started going in my early 20s, and I went very regularly for 10 years. And then there was just so little active alcoholism in my life, it sort of wasn't making sense for me to go. And my dad was actually never the alcoholic in my life. But I was telling a friend right around the time of my dad's decline about Al-Anon because I thought it might be something that would be useful for her. And I talked about it with such warmth and energy. She said to me, wow, you really love it. Are you going to start going back? And I thought, oh, good idea. And so just kind of getting back in those precepts, like I am not responsible for another person's life. Their choices are their choices. I have my higher power, as in God, as I choose to believe in God. And that person has their own higher power, like all of those lessons really came into play. It definitely got me thinking about what is my job and what isn't my job, which is one of the main questions that comes up in the coaching sessions.
Yeah.
One example, I'm giving a shout out to my dad, but there was this great point where he was ready to move, and he was going to move into affordable senior housing in a city where there were more resources, and that city would be Portland. I'm an only child.
Right.
He knows nobody in Portland, but Portland is a special place in his history, and it's a great city. It's a great city for seniors. It's a great state to be in if you're older and poor. And also, he wanted the culture of it, and a spot opened up. So during that conversation, multiple conversations I had with him about his planned move, he was thinking about selling the single wide trailer. And he said, well, maybe I'll sell it to my next door neighbor who grows pot. And so then he can use the lot, and he'd buy it for maybe $5,000 or $10,000. And I said, I wonder if you could get more if you sold it through the realtor, because he wasn't even sure if the neighbor wanted to buy it. And he said, oh, no, I'm sure not. He said, it wouldn't pass inspection. I've done all the wiring myself. He was not an electrician.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think there is such a thing as passing inspection. I think that just relates to how much you can get for it. And he sort of said, pshaw, or something, probably literally pshaw. I said, would it be all right if I investigated and saw if I could find a realtor? And he said, suit yourself. So I took that as permission. And I decided it was something I was willing to do. And I found a realtor, and I connected the two of them. And he worked with a realtor, and the realtor sold the single wide trailer for $50,000.
Oh,
nice. My dad was delighted.
Of course.
And since he tended to go through money pretty fast, it wasn't going to last that long. When he had it, he used it. He was very generous. And also he loved the finer things in life. And when he didn't have it, he was really good at living on the edge. He was really good at that. And I think, what did I learn from that? That was the question, learnings is sort of figuring out what your job description is and isn't in terms of sort of what your capabilities are, what is willing to be received. Yeah, that's really it. Because if the person doesn't want it, and or if you can't give it for whatever reason, like you don't have the time or you don't have the skill or you don't have the emotional capacity because maybe the person is an ingrate, which happens.
Yeah, which happens.
Then maybe that's not in your job description. So this was something that was.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think one of the things that I learned it was like a professional coaching capacity, but that stuck with me forever, was adults are going to adult. Adults get to do whatever they want, and mulling over somebody else's decision, the alignment with what I believe to be the best decision and their final choice, whether or not that matches is totally out of my control. Now, am I able to live and breathe that all the time? In some spaces, absolutely. When it comes to my aging mother, it's way more difficult for me because part of it is the parent-child relationship changes so much, and something that never was on my radar, I don't know that it didn't exist before, but was never really on my radar, was a protective quality. My mom always had my dad, and them as a unit, they had sort of created their own ways to protect each other from kind of the world, from bad decisions, from the consequences of decisions. And so I never, as the child, I never had to be part of that. And I'm really grateful. I think that was a really healthy thing. We never had a codependent relationship. My parents were their own highly functional unit. And so my dad's death really shined a light for my siblings and I on the ways in which my parents' joint partnership worked and the things that he held responsibly. And suddenly that didn't exist. And I think it took us so long to realize you can't expect somebody to suddenly just have that skill set overnight. And so there's going to be a lot of shit that falls through the cracks. that doesn't make sense to you because it had never fallen through the cracks before.
Mm-hmm.
And then the aging piece on top of that, it was like, now she's alone and she's aging. And I feel this desire and responsibility to like protect her and take care of her in the way that she did for me and in the way that my dad was able to do that. And I think part of my learning has been, she doesn't want me to.
Yes.
And I'm like, why the fuck not? I'm being so nice. I'm trying to protect you. And
oh, that's such a good point. And that makes me curious, Maggie, if you run into that where it's like, but I want to help.
It's not your job. And like, I don't actually want that at all. Yeah.
Right. I have. And one of the funny things about coaching, and I wonder if this is the same, Rebecca, for you with therapy, a client comes with you with a situation that is exactly your situation. And you're just like, oh, fuck me.
Right.
Yes.
Because of course you're totally present for the client, but you're thinking the universe has brought this into my life for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself, here, I'll give you first story that comes to mind, which is another story about my dad.
Mm-hmm.
So here's this beautiful story I just told you about my dad saying, suit yourself, which means
green light.
You have my permission to help.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's the opposite story. So my dad did move to Portland, and he moved all by himself. This is a man who had had a heart attack before. He rented a van. He removed the seats from the van. He loaded the van with his stuff. He drove the van maybe as quickly as you can go with maybe spending one night on the road to Portland.
Right.
He unloaded the van, brought it up to the 4th floor, even though there was an elevator. He brought the van back to California, brought up another load, and moved in. And then he had a heart attack.
Oh,
surprise,
okay.
surprise.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so then he was in the hospital, and then he got through that. So the fact that all that happened without my involvement tells you a lot about
Mm-hmm.
what was not on my job
Right.
description.
Yes.
Because he had not put it there. And then he lived there and had a wonderful life for, I think, almost a year. He had a good time going to the laundromat. And to farmer's market, and I think he went to a few free concerts, and he went back to read his old college campus and found the, whatever you call the mushroom society is, if you're into hunting mushrooms, like
Mm-hmm.
he really had a good life. And I did introduce him to a woman there who was a person who could help older people with this and that. And eventually, I think he might have hired her twice in the year. At a certain point, maybe after another heart attack, I can't remember. And he was lugging his laundry across town to his favorite really hip laundromat that had really good cappuccino next door.
Fair enough.
There were laundry machines in the basement of his building. Let's just be clear. Oh, and this was on the bus during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
He really liked these outings. So this gives you an idea of how much he was loving his life. And then he had something that involved his bladder, which then led to needing a catheter. And I visited during some of those tests. I was trying to come every 3 months just to visit and enjoy my time and see him and him enjoying me. And then on a phone call with him, and this was during COVID and this was pre-vaccine, he said, yeah, I went for a walk and I came back and I got a horrible pain in my hip. So I've been sitting down for the last few days. And you would think I would say, oh, Dad, didn't you call the doctor? But I knew our relationship and I knew he wasn't going to do it. Mm-hmm. And even though I had durable medical power of attorney, mm-hmm. I did not have HIPAA disclosure. So it's not like I could call anybody and find out what was going on. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I'll be okay. And I said, well, have you been able to eat and things like that? And he said, yeah, I've got food in the house. And I said, can I order you any groceries? And he said, no. And he wasn't adamant yet, but we talked a couple of times a week over the next maybe week and a half. And he became less cogent and he became more adamant about not wanting help. And I thought, okay, so this hip thing, and, I knew he would never want to be in a nursing home. He didn't mind going to the hospital, but he would never want to be in any sort of skilled nursing or rehab. I think it was a couple weeks later when it was really clear to me that he was just real fuzzy and that he was not. I said, have you eaten anything? And he said, I had an egg. And I thought, okay, so he's undernourished. And I said, is there anything I can do? Can I order you anything? That kind of thing. And you would think I would have gotten on a plane, pre-vaccine or no, But I know him, and I knew that he would not answer the door if I came. He was very much setting a boundary.
Oh, wow.
I ordered him a meal from his favorite restaurant to be delivered to his door, and his favorite meal from that restaurant. Mm-hmm. And then he called me before it came, and he said, I need to make it clear to you, I do not want anything from you. And in fact, I don't even want you to call me. When I'm ready, I'll call you. I could tell he was summoning up so much strength to give a very clear command.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, Dad, I've just ordered, a meal from this one restaurant. And he said, can you cancel it? And I said, I'll see what I can do.
Wow.
And he said, all right. And I said, I love you. I don't know if he hung up on me. And we had plenty of conversations over the prior years where we sort of thought it was going to be the end. And he would always, he said, I love you to me. I said, I love you to him. He would say, we know we're good. And we did. We knew that we were good. So you would think that this would be the most horrifying thing ever. It was not. It was like, okay. So I, of course, promptly called his various ex-girlfriends and friends, and they'd say, Maggie. And I didn't even know them that well. They'd be, I'm so glad you called. Barrett called me and he told me not to call them. Mm-hmm. So apparently he was doing this. He was really, yeah. And so basically I spent the next 3 weeks, 1 minute at a time, thinking, worst case scenario, I get a call from the ICU. We got him in time. Mm-hmm. I don't know, how he'll come through this, but what nursing home do you want for him? That would be the worst case. Best case, I get a call from him. Hi, honey, because he was a really resilient guy and nothing is out of the realm of possibility. And the middle case is what happened. I got a call from the coroner. Mm-hmm. It's called voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. I mean, people do it. And whatever he made good decisions for himself. Most people would not call them good decisions. He was it looks from the outside like he would do impulsive, really stupid shit, crazy things. That's what it looked like from the outside. But he always felt like he was doing the right thing, guided by his own inner voice. And that is what he did. And they found him apparently sitting up on his little daybed. He had received morphine in cases of emergency, in cases of heart attack. The morphine was untouched. He had called his very special ex-girlfriend the day before he died. I knew that from her later because she had received a call from him where he hadn't spoken, but she could tell it was him because of his phone made a weird clicking sound. And so, talk about setting a boundary and saying, no, I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
That's how my dad did his death.
Wow. Wow, Maggie, thank you for sharing all of that with us.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It is. It's such a tender story. And I think one of the things that it makes me think about, I think in integrating my dad's passing and integrating that death, watching my mom aging and trying really hard to understand her boundaries. I don't think our family is as good about setting clear boundaries as like your dad calling and being like, hey, here's the law. So I was just sort of in awe and admiration of a parent being able to do that. I was like, wow, I've never experienced boundary setting in that way.
But it has its own problems. Let's be clear.
Oh yeah, no, I can see the shadow side of it as well. But one of the things that it has done for me, and I think one of the things that I have been thinking about a lot, I have been creating notes to myself about what aging is going to be for me. And my mantra that I sort of ask the great mystery is, may I age with humility and grace. May I be humble enough to ask for help when I need it. May I be graceful enough to see as the weakness comes in, like it's happening now. I hop on my Peloton and I see like my best ever. And my best ever was 5 years ago. And I'm like, God, why could I never catch up with that girl? And there were times when I would just, I would have this like horrible sense about myself. And I'm like, girl, you get on this bike or this rower every single day. You lift weights. What are you talking about? Like, you are supposed to age. you are never going to be the strongest you've ever been or the fastest you've ever been. Give myself the grace to be like, but you get up and do it every day. And so I find myself asking for like the universal guidance that I can keep that in mind, but also putting really practical things in place, like the things that made my mom furious about my grandmother's choices, the things that are like literally the exact same things that make me furious about the exact same choices my mom is making. And thinking to myself, how do I ensure that I have the ability to self-reflect when that moment comes for me? Because I don't want to infuriate my children. And I know I will. There will be other things that I have absolutely no reflection on. But thinking about your dad, I think about the things that I put into place for myself and sort of schedule out for myself, like, Andrea, when this moment comes, here's the thing that you need to reflect on. So I'm just kind of curious how that process with your dad caused you to sort of think about your own mortality, or if it did. Maybe I'm just like morbid and I think about my death a lot.
Oh, I actually think about my mortality on a daily basis because I have a daily mortality practice.
Ah, I love that. I actually love that. We're going to need to hear about that, but go ahead.
So I will tell you about that. But may I first say that when I hear what you're saying, and if I were coaching you, I'd be like, may I share what goes on in my mind when I hear you say that? Like I'd be very tender in a coaching conversation about introducing this. But I have to say, first of all, from your mouth to God's ear. Because the nicest people, when they get old, sometimes they just get nasty. There is so much out of our control of our aging process. So I just got to put that out there. And then the other thing I want to say is what I love, and I've really learned a lot about aging. There's this great book, and I'm not going to remember the name of it.
You'll remember it later, and we'll put it in the show notes.
But we'll put it in the show notes. But we age better if we have better attitudes about our aging. And so you're never going to catch up with that girl on the Peloton 5 years ago, but you are where you are now. And you have many years in the future where you can be so optimally physically healthy, and it's a beautiful thing. And also you are growing in wisdom, and your brain patterns are actually connecting in ways that they were unable to when your body was younger. So it is really a both and thing.
That's beautiful. And I want to say, I hear you about not having control. And as somebody who loves a plan and loves control, I think my sort of mantra has been to enter into aging with an intention, because I feel like our culture is just to avoid and try to stop aging and just avoid it. And I'm like, it is coming. This is the one thing I do know and can plan on is I'm just going to keep getting older and I'm going to die. And so how could I enter into it with some kind of welcome? I think about Frances Weller a lot and, welcoming grief into our life, but in the terms of like, this is part of living. And if I never loved that deeply, I would never be grieving, and I can't have one without the other. And so thinking about aging as a preciousness and as a gift, and loving every older version of myself as much as possible, versus a natural longing for that girl on the Peloton 5 years ago who was like crushing a personal record every single day, and the one who I'm like, I am not even get close, and loving her just as much. So I do hear you, and it is a daily practice. I don't know, Rebecca, what's kind of resonating with you around?
Well, this is why I don't work out, so that there is no self to compare myself to, and I could potentially become the strongest I've ever been if I like.
You always have the potential.
I always have. I'm saving it. One day. I mean, there's so much that's resonating, and I can feel like all this bubbling up of wanting to just jump in and say something about that and something about this. And so I'll start with just what we're currently talking about, which is the idea of self-aging, and that I mean, it'll kind of blend into some of the things I want to share about my mom and that resonate a lot. Very hyper independent, very resilient. Like I do imagine if once we start to get to where it's like, oh, you're aging and I'm worried and like there's things I want to do, she's just going to be like, please stop calling me. I got this, and I respect that and I love her. But what for me at one point, I can't remember what book it was in. I don't think it was a book related to aging or grief or anything. It was someone's memoir maybe, but they talked about that there's a Japanese concept, like a word or a concept that you want to be easy to carry. And so that as you're aging, you want your children to actually want you to be at home. And I thought about that. My mom had her mom live at her house at the end of my grandmother's life. And my grandmother was a hard human. She had a very long bout with addiction and alcoholism. And then when she found AA, she was then sober, but so angry. And like so much of that part hadn't been dealt with. And so it was kind of surprising to me that my mom would say, yes, come live with me as she's at the end of her life, because she wasn't easy to carry. And she was miserable and she complained a lot. And she died. I mean, she may have died in the hospital, but that's her main address was my mom's house at the point that she died. But I think about my mom, and she actually is easy to carry. And so I think, good job, because any of us would take you in and let you just be in our house and we'd find a way to have whatever support she needs. But I think she's so independent. She'd be like, no, I'm not coming to live with you. I'll just go outside and die if I want to die. Like
right.
She just would.
she might pull a Barrett Miller on you.
Yes,
Right.
she might. And she probably will call me and let me know after she listens to this, because she is a fan and she does listen.
She is. We appreciate you.
Right. But I think about that in terms of my relationship with my own daughter and just, I don't know what the future holds. And I definitely do not have a savings account that will support me being in the expense of a nursing home or, any of those things that are really challenging. I'm sure, there's Medicare and Medicaid, but that doesn't put you in the nicest accommodations. I'd rather be with friends and family. There's all those things that I think about. But yeah, it's interesting to consider all of that. And I love holding these visions for sort of the aging piece and the wisdom piece and this new phase of life of walking into that. And I recently did, on a friend's request, made a TikTok video of myself aging. And I'm not even on TikTok. I was like, I'll get on and I'll do it. And I'm promptly getting off. But because this friend is up against a life-threatening diagnosis and wants to see themselves old, and then was like, can we all do this? And when I did it, I was like, oh, I love her. And we don't have enough pictures of ourselves old. We have all these pictures of the past. And I want more pictures of me old, because she looks like she's made of an oak tree. Like she is solid and wise, and she probably will just tell you your future when you walk in the room. Like
Totally.
I was attributing all these qualities. So I love that suggestion of like the future self. And you might have things to say to that, but I did have this sort of question that actually is related to my mom, and she'll be so tickled that I'm asking you this question. But in our first episode, I talked about how I told my mom, I'm going to be sad when you're gone. And I tried to have this really sweet sort of eulogizing someone while they're alive and saying like, this is what I love about you, whatever. And I, of course, am breaking into tears because I'm highly sensitive and emotional about all the things. And she says, oh, don't cry. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm going to cry. You don't get to control that. And so then she hears the episode and she texts me, I love the episode. You guys are fantastic. I'm learning so much. And don't cry. Did you learn anything? But, it's like I have a relationship with her where we can kind of joke about that. But I was thinking about that as she's actually making a request. Now, I can't control whether I cry or not. But you were saying, what can you control? What can you not? What do you honor? What do you not? What comes up for you when I'm sharing some of that and what you would say to people or say to me?
Oh my gosh. Well, Rebecca, you get to cry.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know your relationship or her. Who knows why she's saying that, if it's to reassure you or if it's that she's uncomfortable with you crying. And it seems to me, and again, I'm not coaching right now because I would not be have so much to say if I were coaching. I would be asking you questions. But it seems to me, might be that she wants to protect you. And if that's the case, that's okay and that's beautiful, and it doesn't mean that you can't cry.
Okay. I just have this thought. Is it for me that she doesn't want me to cry, or is it for her to be free and not feel overly tethered?
Such an interesting point. I think even in the afterlife, she'll have her higher power And her higher power will just have to help her cope with you crying. I mean, I think that it is not on your job description not to cry. You may decide that it's uncomfortable enough that you might find places to cry that aren't with her. You might choose that. There is that whole thing, and we don't need to go off on that whole tangent, but when you're around dying people, and at least from everything I've read, from my own experience, they might get guilty and hold on if you don't let them go. So Rebecca, when I speak to you about, like, are you worried about her being tethered? I'm not so much thinking about the afterlife as, if you are lucky enough to be with her when she dies, it is something for you to be aware of and meditate on so that you can both be taking care of yourself, but making space for her. Because my sense is there is a level of difficult spiritual work to actually go. I don't really know because I haven't been there. But does that make sense?
Yeah, that resonates. Yeah, totally.
And my grandma also was one of those people who was like, I don't want people to cry at my funeral. I don't want it. I was like, Grandma, you've been in my life my whole life. I am going to cry. You don't get to tell me. You've told me a lot of what to do in my life, and that is not one thing I will honor for you. But I do remember while she was passing, I do remember feeling a responsibility of not wanting my fear of living a life without my grandma, of my sadness of this is the last time I'm going to hold her hand alive, and like her ears as they are going to hear me tell her that I love her, and not wanting to burden her in that moment with my sadness. Like I wanted her to know most of all that I was there in that moment for her. And the moment she was gone, I was going to lose my shit and cry my eyeballs out. But in those final hours where she really was, I think, spiritually and physically working on dying, that my job was to just fucking be there. And so it wasn't that I didn't have tears in my eyes, but, my messages to her on a spiritual psychic plane and vocally were, we are all going to be okay. Like, you've done such a fucking great job. There is nothing holding you here. Everything waits for you on the other side. Your son, your mother, like so much is waiting for you. And like, it's your time. My dad's there, like, go, it's fine. And I just wanted her to have that release. I just remember like those literal 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes, I was crying a lot, but I was crying and saying like, go, it's okay, you can go. And I was fucking sad, and I knew she was 96, so I had been preparing for her death 15 years. Every day is a gift. And I remember telling someone, and I will be totally fucking selfish and wish I had gotten one more day. I am so grateful, and I'm selfish. She was the best grandma, and I would have taken one more week with her, one more day to sit by her side. I would have taken any of it.
Yeah. I want to go back to something that you said about your own experience, Maggie. And I feel like this often as a therapist with clients where they sort of will hand over their personal power or their wisdom or what, and think, okay, you have the answers. And I always have to remind myself they actually know. And you said a piece about your own journey where you were talking about, I was learning all these things, but actually I was remembering. And I love that like remembering what you already know. And I wonder how often that comes up when you're working with people, that you're helping them kind of remember some wisdom that they hold or something that they already know, and what you might say to our listeners as a way of relating to the process of your parents aging.
Such an interesting thing to think about. It's like I could go the direction thinking about this one client who's like, oh my gosh, I had the answers. I kept on asking you, and then you kept on asking me questions back. Not that I won't tell people about resources. That's why it's not pure coaching. It's also a bit of consultation when you're telling about resources and things. Coaching is just the coolest modality. I mean, there's so many cool modalities, but I just really like coaching for what I do. I mean, one client said to me, oh, I get how this works. I throw up on the table and then you help me make sense of what's there. It's just basically, I ask the client a question based on what I've heard them say, and then they answer. And then I'm picking up patterns. In some ways it's like therapy, but I'm not a therapist, so I don't know all the ways it's not like therapy. And then I ask them more questions based on what they've said. And then it's sort of this constant process of sort of opening up and then honing in and opening up and honing in. And that process magically leads to them tapping into their inner wisdom, and they do have it. And I have no idea what it's going to be because I am not in their bodies and minds and souls. And I love watching coaching demos because I always think, oh my gosh, how is this person going to get to any clarity? And then it happens simply by a very disciplined on the part of the coach process of listening and asking the right questions.
I do think that there's an intersection of coaching and therapy, and especially I think the deep listening being such an important part of being effective. And I always think also as a therapist, there's not one way to finding the answer you're seeking. And so therapy, coaching, like a mentor, maybe it's through a religious organization, that people find their ways to the answer they're seeking. And so I love what you're saying. And I think that's a big piece that I would actually say to them, like, just find someone who deeply listens and they'll help you hear yourself.
Yeah, really agree with that. Yeah.
And then to offer something to our listeners around a basic what you're in control of, what you're not in control of, that sort of feels like everyone should hear this message.
Yeah, it's such a good and challenging question. And it's really funny because I often go through an exercise with a client about what you can control and what you can't control in whatever particular situation the client is bringing that day. And I would say that there's not necessarily a universal what you can control and what you can't control. But I will say that, and this is coming from Al-Anon, I'll give it all due credit, I cannot control people, places, and things. I cannot even necessarily control myself, but what I can take responsibility for is where I direct my thoughts. And so, the serenity prayer is just so great. It's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that kind of sums it up.
Yeah.
That's the only universal that I've got. And then situation by situation, it's super helpful to sit down with another person and be like, all right, in this particular situation, what can I control? What can't I control? And it always ends up being exactly that, what I just said, but a person needs to get to it through their own lens of their own experience.
Yeah. And do you do a piece around with coaching? And this is what I imagine would be really helpful with coaching, because like you're saying, even when you were coaching yourself, you were like, oh, I wish I had another person. And how I imagine that other person is the part about granting me the courage to accept the things I cannot change. I don't always remember the
serenity, but that's okay.
The serenity to accept. Okay.
Yeah.
When I think about imagining the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, usually the serenity is the part we need help with.
The serenity is the hard part to get to. I'm thinking about different clients that I've had or have currently. Okay, I'll call her Ariel. She did get to a serene place, and it really came from just recognizing she was never going to be able to make a case good enough to her in-laws that she had really good and valid reasons not to fly across the country and be with her mother-in-law in her next surgery and drop her entire life and not spend time with her kids and not do the things she did in the town that she lives. Her in-laws had such unreasonable expectations, and she was not going to be able to ever convince them that those expectations were unreasonable. And just knowing that, I'm never going to be able to make a case. So what I do have control of is that I can stop trying and I can continue to hold my boundaries and I can continue to give what I can. And that provided a level of serenity. And then we talked about who do you have around you in your life who can reinforce that message.
Right. Oh, I love this.
So, Maggie, you mentioned this, and I know that Rebecca was also interested, but you had said that you have a mortality practice. So we'd love for you just to, if you don't mind, share that with us.
Sure. Yeah, it started many years ago, just an intention that anytime I saw, and I'm 60 now, so anytime I saw a liver spot or something, I would be like, oh, yay. I have a reminder that I'm mortal. That's so cool. And what came from that was like, wow, today is awesome. You know, it just naturally came.
Yeah.
And then there's just some great readings. I have a great quote. I'll send it to you for the show notes from Buddhism, I believe. And then also there's this fabulous book called How to Be Sick. I'll also send that to you for the show notes. But currently my mortality practice is, I do my gratitude practice in the morning, but my mortality practice, as I'm going to bed, I say, and this actually comes from our synagogue's liturgy around the high holidays, I am on a journey and death is my destination. And I add, just in case that's not enough, I add, and everything around me is on loan to me. And somebody I know said, and then you're able to get to sleep. And the truth is that it just makes me so grateful for the present moment.
That is so beautiful, Maggie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm one of those people who that would help me sleep. Yeah.
That's really lovely. So, Maggie, I want to thank you again for joining us. I feel like the conversation's just starting and we could have another couple hours with you. So, don't be surprised if down the line we ask you if you would be willing to come back. I feel like you have so much to share on so many levels. So, thank you. Our deepest gratitude for spending this time with us.
Thank you. I love spending time with you guys.
So we always close out by sharing how we're touching into our grief this week. So we invite you to share with us as well. So Rebecca, before we head out, how are you touching into your grief this week?
I think just in real time, like I mentioned at the start of the podcast I had a moment. So Sunday was sort of when everything exploded. So we're now 6 days out from that day, but it was sort of like this hard day where my cat was sick in a way that I thought he could die. And then we had to go to an emergency vet. And then I get this call that my daughter was with someone who has COVID. And then I've like tried to deal with that. And I could really feel there was this moment where I was like, I want my days to be my own again. And it feels like they keep getting hijacked with all these things to do. And then there was this thing that I felt truth about life that was like it's sort of along the lines of like things being on loan, but it felt like it's funny that things have worked out so well that you've had all these days to yourself for so much of your life, because this is life. It was like letting myself feel the grief of how the plans you made are not the plans you get to have. And right now you have to be with what's happening here and feel the grief of that and all the things that feel hard in this moment, but also the appreciation. I'm glad I let myself feel the grief, because then I think I'd either get stuck in complaining or trying to push it away and be like, always look on the bright side. Like, we're okay. And so it was like both but it just feels like this week has held a lot of grief in just the ways that I've had to let go of a lot that I wanted to be different.
That's so tender and very real, I think, for so many of us. So thank you for sharing. Maggie, I'd love to hear how you're touching into your grief this week.
Well, prepping for this podcast helped. I'm doing some creative writing these days, and so I thought, I'm going to do writing exercises to prepare for this podcast. And when you do that, unexpected things show up. So I was thinking about how when I was a child, there was my mother and my father and my stepmother and my grandma Tybee and my grandpa Milton, and then great-grandma Babbitts and great-grandma Herbstman and all those. And then, time passed, and then it was just Grandma Tybee and, and Aunt May, and then my mom and my cousin Mirandy and my dad and my stepmom. And then more time passed. And so to bring us to the present day, there's just my mom and my cousin Mirandy. And when you go to like the Children's Museum or something, and there's those toys that are mini Ferris wheels, and you put a weight on the top car of the mini Ferris wheel and it goes down and then it drops off. It's like I just had this image of this one of those toy Ferris wheels with these sort of heavy balls just dropping off, and now there's only that was pretty profound to think of. And then I thought about the people that I love, my husband and my daughter, and it just made me really happy that I have them, even though technically they're on loan to me. So
that's so beautiful. Thank you, Maggie. It does remind me, we oftentimes refer to Anderson Cooper's podcast, all there is. And this week he interviewed a woman who was adopted and both her parents have passed. And Anderson, who's talked about this oftentimes, and her connected around sort of all those weights falling off their Ferris wheel and kind of being the last one to remember, like, do you remember when? Yeah. Mine has been kind of two ways. So one, coming through 3 deaths in a row at the end of a year and moving into a holiday season of a lot of energy and things having to get done. And I dropped the ball on some other shit. And coming back into life this week, I had to recognize that I did, and wrestled with some guilt and some shame that I had dropped the ball. And I am so grateful for the people who offered me so much grace in recognition that I could never have carried all of that. And when I agreed to do something, I was at a very different place. Mm-hmm. And my ability to carry through with those things really changed in the face of multiple deaths. Even if it had only been one, I don't think the expectation for them would have been, I mean, I just didn't even have it in me to like communicate, hey, I'm not going to get this shit done. I didn't even remember until they were like, hey, did you do this? And I was like, no, why would I do that? But then also, then suddenly, oh my God, Andrea, you didn't do this. They were relying on you. What's wrong with you? And just kind of been offering myself grace around, how could you have ever expected yourself to do that? And guess what? That wasn't important over the last couple of months, because you were taking care of yourself and getting through life and making all of these things happen. And the world kept turning and you were not able to turn with it. And that's totally okay. So I've just been kind of wrestling with the weight of the world turning and their expectations. And sometimes you just can't meet them and you need to be forgiving with yourself. So I've been doing a lot of self-forgiveness this week.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Maggie. It's been a beautiful conversation.
It absolutely has. Thank you to our listeners, and we will be back soon. All our best, all our love to everyone listening.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All the Grief. You can find us on Instagram at All the Grief Pod. And please take a moment to rate our podcast and share us with your friends. We'd love to keep expanding our reach to all the people who could benefit from conversations on grief. Take care.